thrown out at midnight with nothing but her newborn twins. She had nothing to lose, but what her family didn't know would change everything forever. The night was colder than anything I had ever felt, the bitter wind cutting through the thin blanket I clutched around me, shielding my double newborns from the world that had abandoned us. My husband's betrayal had been swift, his eyes cold as ice, echoing the words that shattered my world. "You and the babies are gone. Don't come back." My in-laws had laughed as if cruelty was a sport, tossing our belongings onto the empty street. I could hear the distant city lights flicker, oblivious to the despair unfolding on this tiny, desolate road. I held my babies closer, their soft cries muffled against my chest, my heart breaking as I wondered how someone could love so little, betray so completely. Every step I took away from the house felt heavier than the last, each breath mingled with fear, pain, and the raw uncertainty of survival. I had nothing, not even hope. But I had them, and for them, I had to keep moving. The world felt enormous, hostile, and merciless, yet a faint spark ignited inside me, a whisper of determination. Survival was not just an option, it was a promise to my children. I glanced down at their fragile faces, newborn innocence that had no idea how cruel life could be, and I swore silently that one day they would know that their mother had fought for them when no one else would. The streets were empty, the houses dark, and my footsteps echoed in the silence of rejection. But even in the darkness I sensed a shift, a moment that would change everything, even if I could not yet see it. I walked past the familiar city skyline, each light a reminder of life moving on without me, and yet I carried a secret they could never take away. For years of appearances, wealth, and status had hidden my true identity. Tonight, stripped of all comfort, they did not know that their cruelty had not defeated me, it had awakened me. Every insult, every shove, every laugh at my misfortune became fuel, a fire that I would one day turn into a storm they could never imagine. My double newborns slept peacefully against me, unaware that their tiny hearts already carried the promise of a future filled with strength, resilience, and unexpected fortune. With each breath I drew in the cold night air, I felt resolve replacing despair, determination replacing hopelessness. They had thrown me out at midnight, believing me powerless, fragile, dependent, but they could not have been more wrong. I had nothing, and yet I had everything that truly mattered: courage, instinct, and the promise that destiny was far from over. Somewhere ahead, my life was waiting to rewrite itself, to flip the tables, to reveal that the woman they dismissed as weak, broken, and insignificant was, in fact, more powerful than they could ever comprehend. Tonight marked the beginning, the first step on a path of transformation, revenge, and triumph, a journey that would force them to realize, too late, that they had underestimated the mother, the woman, and the billionaire they had never known I was. I wandered the empty streets, the weight of the double newborns pressing against my chest, their soft breathing the only rhythm keeping me grounded. Every passerby's indifferent glance felt like another reminder that I was invisible, discarded, nothing more than an afterthought. My husband, my so-called family, had turned their backs, leaving me alone in a world that suddenly seemed enormous and merciless. I found a small park bench under a flickering street lamp and sat, rocking the babies gently, trying to shield them from the biting cold. I whispered to them promises I barely believed myself, that we would survive, that we would find safety, that they would never know this kind of cruelty as long as I could protect them. I felt every tear burn as it fell, yet beneath the despair, a tiny ember of defiance flickered to life. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but they could never take what I carried inside: my intelligence, my strength, my undying determination. I remembered the luxurious life I had led before: the mansion, the designer clothes, the family who smiled in photographs but never truly saw me. All of it had been superficial, meaningless, until now, when survival stripped me bare, revealing a power I had long forgotten. I shivered as the night deepened, unsure where to go, but I refused to return to that house, refused to beg, refused to plead for mercy from people who had already proven they had none. I wrapped the babies closer, feeling their tiny heartbeats against mine, and vowed that the humiliation, the rejection, the cruelty would not define us. Somewhere inside me, I knew that night marked a turning point, a moment that would eventually transform the weakness they assumed I had into an unstoppable force. Hours passed like eternity, yet I did not sleep, did not rest, not fully, because every shadow on the sidewalk, every distant car light reminded me that this world was indifferent and only I could change my circumstances. I began to plan, thinking of every resource I had ever hidden, every connection I had, every advantage my family never realized I possessed. I had been underestimated, dismissed, thrown into the cold without a shred of respect, but now, without warning, I saw the opening to reclaim control, to rise, and to rewrite the rules. I whispered again to my children, soothing them while also speaking to myself, telling us all that night was temporary, that justice would come, that one day the people who had laughed at our pain would witness our strength. The wind carried their soft cries, mixing with my own, blending fear and hope, despair and determination. And in that blending, I found clarity. I would survive, not as a beggar, not as a victim, but as a mother, as a woman, as someone they could never dismiss again. The night felt endless, but with every heartbeat, every step, every breath, I realized that this moment, though cruel and terrifying, was the crucible that would forge the life they could not foresee. They had thrown me out at midnight, thinking it was the end, but for me, it was only the beginning, the first chapter in a story that would shake their entire world and reveal the power, wealth, and resilience they never imagined I had. The first hints of dawn crept across the sky, pale light cutting through the darkness of the night I had spent wandering the streets with my double newborns pressed against me. I had no home, no family to turn to, no comfort, nothing but their fragile warmth and the icy determination burning inside me. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, every breath a battle against fear, exhaustion, and despair. I remembered the laughter, the mocking words, the sneering faces of the people who had thrown us out, believing that we were powerless, weak, and insignificant. They had no idea what they had unleashed. They had no idea that in stripping me of wealth, status, and comfort, they had awakened something far stronger, far more dangerous than they could ever comprehend. I wandered past shuttered shops and empty streets, each shadow looming like a specter of my past humiliation, and yet I refused to crumble. My mind raced, calculating, planning, mapping every possible resource, every hidden advantage, every secret I had kept from the people who thought they knew me. I remembered the accounts, the investments, the businesses they had always thought were under my husband's control, and a spark of possibility ignited within me. I had been underestimated, belittled, and ignored for years, and now, finally, the world had stripped away the illusions that had blinded them to my true power. I pressed the babies closer to me, their soft cries mixing with the city's morning silence, and I whispered to them the promise of a life they would never be forced to suffer through the cruelty of others. They would grow up knowing only strength, only dignity, only love. Exhaustion gnawed at my body, but determination gnawed at my soul, sharper than any hunger or fatigue. I found a small diner, empty and dimly lit, and pushed the door open, the smell of stale coffee mingling with the chill in my bones. The owner glanced up, curious but cautious, as I settled in a corner with the babies, rocking them gently, calculating my next move. My mind replayed every insult, every betrayal, every cold laugh and sneer. They had laughed at my misfortune, thinking I had nothing, but they were wrong. My heart pounded as I realized that this night, this humiliation, was not the end. It was the catalyst. And with every plan forming in my mind, every connection remembered, every secret account and hidden asset coming into focus, I knew exactly how I would make them pay, not with violence, not with revenge, but with the one thing they could never imagine. I would rise. I would take back what they had tried to take from me. I would show them that the mother they mocked, the woman they dismissed, and the billionaire they never knew I was could, and would rebuild a life stronger than anything they could have imagined. By mid-morning, I had mapped a path forward, one that would secure safety, comfort, and power for my children, and simultaneously dismantle the arrogance and cruelty of those who had cast us out. The babies stirred, and I cradled them against my chest, feeling their tiny heartbeats synchronize with mine, each thump a reminder of what I was fighting for. Every decision, every move, every breath was now calculated to serve them, to ensure that their lives would be built on strength, respect, and love, not on fear, manipulation, or ridicule. As the sun climbed higher, the city awoke, unaware that the woman they had discarded in the shadows of the night was already plotting a transformation that would shake the world around her. My in-laws believed they had humiliated me, that they had destroyed me, but they had underestimated the mother, underestimated the woman, underestimated the billionaire hidden beneath the guise of compliance and weakness. I had nothing that they could see, but inside me, I held everything: courage, intellect, and the unbreakable bond of love for my children. They had thrown me out at midnight, thinking it was the end, but for me it was the beginning, the first steps toward reclaiming everything they thought they had stolen. And as I walked back into the city, babies in arms, I knew that soon, very soon, the tables would turn, and the people who had cast us aside would witness the full force of the woman they never saw coming, the mother they never dared to challenge, and the billionaire they never realized existed. By late afternoon, I found a quiet corner in a small, unassuming office space I had rented under a different name. The babies were asleep, their gentle breaths a steady rhythm against the storm raging inside me. I spread out papers, accounts, contracts, and confidential documents I had once ignored, the very tools my husband and in-laws had always assumed were meaningless to me. Every number, every business deal, every hidden investment I had quietly controlled flashed before my eyes like a treasure map they would never see coming. My fingers traced the lines of the contracts, imagining the moves I could make, the leverage I could gain, the power I could reclaim. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every mocking word that had been thrown at me fueled a fire that burned hotter than anything I had ever felt. I would not just survive. I would rise, and they would feel every ounce of their misjudgment. I considered the humiliation I had endured in their mansion, the sneers at my appearance, the dismissive gestures, the complete disregard for my children's safety. It had all led to this moment, a moment of clarity, strategy, and unrelenting resolve. I realized that wealth had always been a mask, a barrier they thought shielded me from reality, but now I saw it as a weapon. I could use it to protect my children, to punish arrogance, and to reclaim respect. I mapped out every step carefully, ensuring that no one would suspect my next move until it was too late. I would confront them on my terms, with undeniable evidence, leverage, and the quiet power of the woman they had underestimated. Hours passed as I strategized, the babies stirring occasionally, and I soothed them, whispering promises of a brighter future, one where cruelty and dismissal would never touch them again. My mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each more daring than the last, and yet every plan rooted in the desire to protect my children and assert the dignity they deserved. I thought about the public, the media, the social circles they valued, and I realized how vulnerable they had made themselves by their arrogance. Every insult they had hurled became a tool I could use, every derisive laugh a stepping stone toward retribution that was just measured and absolute. As night fell again, I no longer felt fear, exhaustion, or despair. Those emotions had been replaced by power, control, and the anticipation of witnessing the shock on their faces when the truth unfolded. I held my babies close, feeling their warmth, their trust, their innocence, and I vowed that this time nothing would stand in my way. The people who had cast us out, who had laughed at our misfortune, who had believed they could diminish me soon, they would witness the full extent of the woman they had underestimated, the mother they had mocked, and the billionaire they had never imagined existed. Every plan, every move, every calculated step was for them, for my children, and for the moment when justice, dignity, and power would finally be restored in a way they could never forget. And in that quiet office, under dim lighting, I felt the first true surge of control, determination, and empowerment, an unstoppable force that would not rest until every slight, every insult, and every injustice had been addressed, and until my children could finally live in a world where love, respect, and strength triumphed over cruelty and arrogance. The next morning I moved swiftly, every step calculated, every moment purposeful. I had gathered evidence, documents, recordings, and proof of every lie, every manipulation, and every betrayal my husband and in-laws had committed. I had transformed the humiliation of last night into a weapon sharper than any anger or resentment I had felt. The babies were asleep in a secure, hidden location, under the care of a trusted assistant I had quietly arranged, and I felt the first true sense of freedom I had experienced since they had thrown us out. I arrived at the mansion under the guise of reconciliation, of appearing meek and compliant, carrying the weight of a woman broken by their cruelty. But they did not know that beneath the surface, I was no longer the person they had dismissed, ridiculed, or humiliated. Every glance, every gesture, every smirk they had directed at me in the past had been stored, cataloged, and transformed into the ammunition I now wielded with precision. I entered the grand foyer, greeted by the cold smiles of the people who had cast me into the night, and I allowed a soft, almost imperceptible smile to play across my lips. They were expecting fear, submission, and weakness. They received none. I began calmly, almost casually, presenting evidence of their financial mismanagement, their lies, and the manipulations that had been hidden behind layers of arrogance and self-importance. They listened, initially with confusion, then with incredulity, and finally with the dawning realization that their entire empire, their carefully curated reputation, the wealth they believed shielded them from accountability, was now vulnerable, and they were powerless to stop the consequences I could initiate. My husband's face turned pale, his arrogance replaced by fear, as he realized the woman he had discarded, the mother he had abandoned, was the same woman who now held the key to both exposure and justice. I outlined the legal, financial, and social actions I would take, detailing contracts, witnesses, and public disclosures that would dismantle the lies they had built their lives on. They tried to interrupt, to deflect, to belittle me, but I was unshakable, every word deliberate, every phrase laced with authority, every gesture a demonstration of control. The in-laws, who had laughed at me, sneered at my supposed weakness, and dismissed my children and me, were now visibly shaken, realizing that the power dynamic they had relied upon for years had vanished. I presented my final point. The double newborns they had thrown out, whom they had believed were inconsequential, were now at the center of the leverage I wielded. I revealed that I had secured guardianship, safety, and legal protection for them, ensuring that any attempt to harm or undermine us would have immediate, irreversible consequences. Their gasps, their stammers, their panic were almost delicious, not for revenge, but for justice, clarity, and truth finally shining light on their cruelty. I ended calmly, with a single sentence, deliberate and unwavering. You underestimated me, you mocked me, you discarded me, but every action you took only built the foundation for the power you now see. You threw us out at midnight, thinking you had ended us, but I have only begun. I left the room after delivering this, letting the weight of my presence, the undeniable truth, and the certainty of my power hang in the air behind me. No shouting, no chaos, no tears, just the quiet, devastating authority of someone who had been broken and rebuilt stronger than ever. I walked down the grand staircase, my posture unshakable, my mind focused, and my heart free from the fear and submission they had tried to impose. The city outside awaited, the opportunities, the allies, the resources I had carefully lined up during the long night of planning were ready for deployment. And with every breath, every calculated step, every decision, I reclaimed not just the wealth, the assets, or the empire, but the respect, dignity, and control that had been denied to me. By the time the in-laws had recovered from the initial shock, it was too late. Every move, every action, every measure I had taken was in place. I had turned humiliation into power, rejection into strategy, and cruelty into the catalyst for an unstoppable rise. And as I stepped outside, the sunlight washing over me, I felt the undeniable thrill of victory, not in vengeance, but in justice, in clarity, in showing the world and the people who had thrown us out that underestimating me, discarding me, or mocking my children had been their gravest mistake. The night they cast us aside had become the first chapter of the story they would never forget. A story where I, a mother, a woman, a survivor, and a billionaire in my own right, emerged unbroken, empowered, and unstoppable. The morning sun streamed through the blinds, casting sharp lines across the floor of the penthouse that had once been a cage, a place of ridicule, cruelty, and betrayal. But now the air felt different, charged with authority, power, and the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed with precision. I had orchestrated every move, every contact, every ally, and every legal safeguard to ensure that the people who had thrown me and my newborns out at midnight, who had mocked, belittled, and dismissed us, now faced the undeniable consequences of their arrogance. I carried the babies with me, their warmth and trust a constant reminder of why every action I had taken mattered. I entered the main hall where my husband and his parents had gathered, expecting perhaps confusion, perhaps defiance. What greeted me instead was shock, awe, and the creeping realization that everything they had believed about control, power, and dominance had crumbled. I calmly laid out the situation, presenting evidence of mismanagement, hidden assets, and every misstep they had made under the illusion of superiority. I revealed the steps I had taken to secure not only my children's safety but also the legal and financial foundation that would protect them forever. My husband's face, once smug, now betrayed a mix of fear, regret, and disbelief. The in-laws, who had laughed at our misfortune, now sat silently, their arrogance stripped away, their mockery replaced by a cautious recognition that they had underestimated me in every way. I explained, without a trace of anger, that the night they threw us out had marked the beginning of a transformation they could not stop. I had turned humiliation into strategy, cruelty into momentum, and rejection into unbreakable resolve. The babies stirred, and I held them close, their tiny hands wrapped around my fingers, and I felt the full weight of their trust, their reliance on me to protect, to nurture, and to fight for a life they deserved. Every word I spoke reinforced the truth. The people who had discarded us had lost control, and the woman they had dismissed, the mother they had mocked, had risen with unstoppable force. I offered them a chance not for forgiveness, not for reconciliation, but for recognition of the truth. They could accept the power shift, acknowledge the consequences, and adapt, or remain in the shadow of their own arrogance, powerless to undo the damage they had caused. I watched as they realized that nothing could erase the fact that I had reclaimed dignity, strength, and authority not through chaos, not through vengeance, but through calculated intelligence, unwavering love for my children, and an unstoppable will. Outside, the city carried on, oblivious to the personal revolution that had occurred within these walls. A revolution that would ripple through every social circle, every business deal, and every moment they had assumed they controlled. And yet, amidst the power, the evidence, and the undeniable shift in control, I felt something even more profound than triumph. I felt peace. I had protected my children. I had asserted my worth. I had taken the humiliation, the cruelty, and the midnight rejection, and turned it into a fortress of strength that no one could penetrate. I had proven, without doubt, that the mother they had scorned, the woman they had mocked, and the billionaire they had ignored was unstoppable. And as the baby slept peacefully in my arms, I realized that the story was not just about revenge or justice. It was about reclaiming life, dignity, and love, showing the world, and most importantly my children, that even in the darkest hours, courage, strategy, and unbreakable resolve can turn despair into triumph, and rejection into unstoppable power. The mansion that had once been a symbol of arrogance, cruelty, and dismissal now stood as a testament to the strength, intelligence, and resilience of a mother who had refused to be broken. And as I walked through the rooms, holding my babies, feeling the weight of every moment we had survived, I knew with certainty that nothing could ever diminish the bond, the power, or the legacy we had begun to build, a legacy of strength, love, and unstoppable courage that would endure forever. Weeks passed, and the world seemed to notice the change before anyone else did. Every phone call, every meeting, every social circle I had been a part of now carried a quiet respect and unspoken acknowledgement that the woman they had once dismissed was no longer someone to underestimate. My children thrived, their laughter filling the spaces that had once been haunted by fear, uncertainty, and rejection. The double newborns, once discarded in the dead of night, now basked in warmth, safety, and love that they had never known. I watched them, their tiny hands reaching for me, their eyes wide with trust. And I felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of wealth or social status could ever replace. My husband and in-laws, humbled by the undeniable shift, approached me cautiously, their pride replaced by reluctant respect. I did not seek revenge, not in the way they imagined. Instead, I allowed them to see the consequences of their cruelty, the way power had quietly shifted, and how love, intelligence, and perseverance could achieve what arrogance and mockery never could. The mansion, once a place of judgment and cruelty, became a home for learning, for nurturing, for building a future where children could flourish without fear. I transformed spaces they had mocked into sanctuaries where laughter, creativity, and resilience thrived. Every room, every corner, became a reminder of how far we had come, how much we had endured, and how strong we had become. I founded initiatives for mothers who had been rejected, children who had been abandoned, and families who had been cast aside, ensuring that no one else would ever feel the isolation and despair we had experienced. My influence grew not through intimidation, not through cruelty, but through empowerment, guidance, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserved respect, love, and opportunity. My husband, now fully aware of the depth, strength, and capability of the woman he had underestimated, became a partner in this new vision, offering support, learning humility, and realizing that love and respect were earned through actions, not wealth or social status. The in-laws, once mocking and cruel, began to understand that their arrogance had blinded them, that power without empathy was empty, and that their place in our lives would now be guided by respect and genuine human connection. And amidst all of this, my children grew stronger, happier, and more confident, their smiles no longer shadowed by fear or rejection. They learned resilience, courage, and the beauty of a mother who would never give up, no matter how dark the night, how cold the world, or how cruel the people around them could be. And one evening, as I held both newborns, feeling their steady breathing, their tiny fists curling around my fingers, I realized that everything, the pain, the humiliation, the midnight rejection, the long nights of strategy and courage, had led to this ultimate moment of victory, not just for me, but for my children, for their future, and for the countless others who would be inspired by our story. I had turned every obstacle into opportunity, every insult into strength, and every cruel act into a catalyst for empowerment. I looked at my babies, at the family we had rebuilt, and I smiled, knowing with absolute certainty that the woman they had tried to destroy was now unstoppable, unbreakable, and finally free. The mansion, the city, the world around me had changed, not because of wealth, not because of status, but because of courage, intelligence, and the unshakable love of a mother who refused to be defeated. And as the sun set, bathing the room in golden light, I felt peace, pride, and fulfillment, knowing that we had survived, we had thrived, and we had shown the world that even in the face of betrayal, cruelty, and rejection, true strength, love, and courage always triumph.